One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Start, launch, market. That is the theme of the Profit Podcast and the 3-step formula that I use to teach others how to create a podcast of their own. So we've already covered how to start a podcast in episode 46. So today I wanted to cover the steps that go into how to launch a podcast. So let's just dive right in. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Because if you've been thinking about creating a podcast for a while, well, I'm so glad you found this show. Think of this as the shortcut / time-saving version of searching Google and YouTube for hours and hours trying to figure out the world of podcasting. Trust me, as a busy mama of 3, I get it. You don't have a lot of time to be spent or wasted, I should say, searching the web, trying to find all the right ideas and all the amazing things that are out there, and you just end up overwhelmed. Trust me, I've been there, done that, took home the souvenir. But this podcast is going to help you in practical ways, because twice a week we'll be delivering episodes that are going to give you steps to help you create a podcast your audience can't wait to listen to. So let's get right to it, shall we? Hey, you. Yeah, you. Yes, I'm talking to you. Do you see? Yeah, okay. So are you looking to start a podcast in 2019, but you're thinking, I don't know what I'd talk about. Like, I have no idea even where to get started. Don't even let that thought overwhelm you, because guess what? I've done all the work for you. I've actually created a workbook that has 500 podcast ideas for any industry. That's right, 500. Actually, it's over 500. I think it's like 554 for any kind of podcast. I specifically created this tool for entrepreneurs who aren't sure if podcasting is right for them. They say, well, I have a blank, insert any kind of industry, business. Will a podcast work for me? My answer, 99.99999% of the time, is yes, a podcast will totally work for that kind of business. So let's say you're in personal finance or real estate or business or marketing or technology or beauty and fashion or pet services or life coaching or parenting or any other number of industries. I've got you covered. Let me show you some podcast ideas that I have for you to get started. You can go to crystalprofit.com/500 podcast ideas. That's Crystal with a K, Profit with 2 F's and 2 T's. crystalprofit.com/500 podcast ideas, and you can grab this free, 100% free download today. Okay, so if you remember back in episode 46, which was not that long ago, we talked about how to start a podcast. So if you haven't listened to that, then I suggest put this episode on pause, go back and listen to how to start a podcast, and be sure to grab the free PDF download that goes with it. That's at crystalprofit.com/start, and that'll walk you through the 7 steps that you need to start a podcast. But today we are talking about launching a podcast. And this is actually an area, like, if I have any regrets, it's I did not spend enough time on the launch plan for my podcast. If you have been following me for a while, then you know I had a podcast called The Rookie Life. And I wanted this podcast to be in existence so badly because I was just ready to do something new. I had been blogging for so long, and the idea of a podcast excited me so much that I did put some thought into it, but I knew I was rushing it to get out the door. Like, I just wanted this up and published. And yes, I did all the planning. And yes, I did a lot of other things behind the scenes that made the podcast process easier on the front, like the behind the scenes part of everything. But I didn't spend a ton of time on launching. And I can, like, the numbers show for it because I didn't have a ton of downloads when I first started. Like, there were plenty of people interested in what I had to say, and they thought it was really cool. Like, I kept getting, people asking me, like, you have a podcast? Like, it was this exclusive thing that no one else in the world could do. And I still have people that think that, like, if you have a dream to start a podcast, you can totally do it. Everything is figure outable, as Marie Forleo says. And, but I just didn't spend a lot of time on my launch plan, and it's actually one of my biggest regrets. So I want to talk about it today so you don't make the same mistakes that I did. So I do have 4 steps for you today. And like I said, last time for how to start, there were 7 steps. I'm trying to make everything as actionable as possible. So whenever you're done listening to this podcast, then you will know, okay, this is what I need to do next in order to get my podcast up and running in 2019 or whenever you're listening to this, because I really believe that this is totally doable. You can do this. You can figure this out. It may seem overwhelming when you think, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about podcasting. How can I do this? We all think that. We all do. You ask anybody that starts podcasting, unless they hire it out for someone to do all of it for them, you're new to it. You're totally new to it. So it's okay to have those feelings, but you're doing the right thing. You're seeking guidance from people that have been doing it for a while and kind of know the ropes. So let's just take a second to say thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And yeah, let's just dive right in. So the first step is I want you to announce your podcast launch date. And I know that can seem really scary. You're like, wait, Crystal, like, I don't have enough podcast content planned, or I don't have it recorded, or I don't have this, or I don't have that. Yeah, that's kind of the point. The point is for you to set a date. I don't care if it's 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 3 months from now, or 6 weeks, whatever. but I want you to pick a date and stick to it. One that you feel comfortable with, one that gives you enough time to plan. For example, I don't want you to say, oh, I'm going to launch my podcast next week and I just picked out my podcast name today. I can do, no. That is not feasible. That's not doable. You're not going to have a good launch. Realistically, 2 weeks to a month is a great time to give you, to plan a proper launch. The longer, the better, actually. There is a great resource that I have for you that is, it's a business boutique interview. It's a podcast and it's a video. I'm going to link to both of these in the show notes. That way, if you want to go check it out. But it's, Christy Wright has the Business Boutique podcast, which is awesome. You should totally go check it out if you have not listened to it. She has great guest speakers. We actually went to the Business Boutique. My mom and I went this past November, and it was amazing. But she talks with Stu McLaren, and he is a membership site expert, and he was actually at Business Boutique, but we didn't get to see him. We went to another session. We didn't get to see him speak there, but I am going to see him this coming October, which I'm really excited about. But they talk about Christy and Stu in this interview pulling off a great launch. And he has done this really well. If you're listening to this when it airs, he is in the middle of a launch for his digital course that he's selling. And man, if you follow him or any of his affiliates, you know what's going on, because they have done an amazing job with promoting everything on social media, doing podcast interviews, doing Facebook Lives, doing all these things. So whenever his course finally opened, his product launched, which is his course, I knew about it, even though I'm not going to purchase it today or tomorrow, but I still know about it. And that is the success of a great launch. And in this interview, him and Christy Wright talk about how any blockbuster movie, the reason why it gets so big is because people talk about it. If you were to just take a movie, any movie, and throw it out in the box office and hope that it does well. Y'all have done this, right? Where you go to the movies and you're going to go see something else, but then you see, kind of the posters on the wall and you're like, I've never heard of any of these movies. Well, then their marketing team did a really bad job. But man, you hear about an Avengers movie or Star Wars, you usually hear about it a year in advance. And that's kind of the buildup. People are like, ooh, I want to go see that. That's coming out. I want to go see that next summer. I want to go see that in Christmas, whatever, the launch is of this big movie. But he says that just the longer the runway you have, the better launch you'll have. So that's just something to think about. But I encourage you to pick a podcast launch date and then hold yourself to it. Don't look back. Don't change your date. So if you feel more comfortable with a longer time frame, then do that. But pick a date and stick with it. So that's step number 1. Announce your podcast launch date. And if you want to go watch the video that I was talking about with Christy and Stu, go to crystalprofit.com/episode 48, and that's where the show notes will be, and you can watch that. Okay, so moving on to your hosting site. Okay, this is probably after people ask me what kind of equipment they need. That's the number 1 question. Number 2 is, how do I get connected to iTunes and Google Play and all the places that people listen to podcasts? Well, that is your hosting site. I like to call it where your podcast lives online. Because you don't, I'm doing, what is that show? Mythbusters or whatever. I think that when you don't understand the podcast world, a lot of people believe you have to upload your show every week to iTunes or Google Play or Spotify or all these places, and you don't. You upload it to one place, which is your hosting site, and that place feeds it out to all the other sources where people listen to podcasts. So personally, I use buzzsprout.com, and I'll link to this in the show notes as well. You'll go to crystalprofit.com/episode 48, And Buzzsprout has been amazing. There are tons and tons of resources out there. I've heard of Spreaker, Lisbon, Anchor, Buzzsprout, Podbean. There's so many resources that are out there, but Buzzsprout is the one that I've tried since day one. I've never tried another platform, and I have been 100% satisfied with them. It's like a monthly fee for you pay for the amount of time that you use. So if you have a podcast that, let's just say each episode is 30 minutes and you post once a week, then that is 2 hours of content roughly over a 4-week period. But if you have more than that, then you pay, it's like a tiered plan. But y'all, your first 90 days with Buzzsprout are 100% free. And that is what I loved about them. Like if you've been around for a while, you know that I'm cheap. Like I don't like to spend and invest a lot of money from the get-go if I don't know something's like 100% going to work out. So I was a little nervous to get started and pay a whole bunch of money and then realize, hey, podcasting is not for me. But turns out I love it. And Buzzsprout was the best place for me to be. And they have great resources. Like if you're thinking about podcasting, then I suggest you join their online Facebook group. And I'll link to that in the show notes too. But that is where, there's so many knowledgeable people about podcasts. Like I constantly ask questions in there too. Like, hey, my audio messed up one time during an interview and I had like 3 audio engineers, like people that understand way more about the technicalities behind podcasting and audio sounds. They were like, oh, well, did you try this? And did you do that? And, they gave me all these tips and tricks. And so that's a great resource to have while you're thinking about podcasting, or if you just have questions, you just throw them out there and man, you'd be so surprised with the response that you get. It's an amazing community. So that's the Buzzsprout Facebook community. And another reason why I really love them is they have great resources on their blog. So just online resources. I think it's just buzzsprout.com/blog. I'll link to it in the show notes. But yeah, it's a great company. And what they do is you pay, like I said, a monthly subscription. I think the plans range from like $12 to like $18. Totally reasonable for something that, you use for the bulk of your content. It totally works for me. But anyway, so that is your hosting site and where your podcast lives online. Okay, so number 3, the third thing I want to talk about is your description and your show notes. So we could actually be here for a really long time talking about this stuff because it's something that I've recently learned a lot more about, and I'm kind of like geeking out on all the things that you can do when it comes to SEO and keywords and all the cool things you can do with your podcast transcriptions and show notes and your descriptions and all the things. So I'm going to go into these kind of briefly, like a general overview, because I do not want us to be here for 2 hours talking about keywords. No. Like your eyes would glaze over. I would probably pass out trying to talk as fast as I can, and none of it would make sense. So I'm just going to really just briefly go over the description, show notes, and keywords. So it's taken me a really long time to understand how keywords and SEO, which if you don't know what SEO means, that's the search engine optimization. That is what Google and the bots on the, on the interwebs crawling around, like that's what they do to rank things whenever they pop up in Google. So it's really taken me a long time to understand how all of this, like all the nuances work together and everything that goes into having an online business. But I think I've finally figured out. I mentioned very briefly in like the content planning and how to start a podcast, like how important keywords are. And it's just becoming even more important as podcasts grow in popularity. And I actually found a really cool article the other day saying that while Google doesn't index podcasts right now, they're going that way. So how cool is that? Like there's going to be bots that are listening to all of our podcasts and all the things that are going out. And then eventually Google will be able to translate those and rank them, and there's just a whole bunch of geeky stuff that like excites me. I know I won't even go down that rabbit hole because we'll be there for a while. But anyway, so you want to make sure that you have relevant words and terms and phrases that you mention in your podcast descriptions, which the podcast description is what pops up on iTunes. I'll just use iTunes, even if you use Google Play or wherever. It's if you click on the Profit Podcast, then you will see a description, and it's filled with keywords that I want Google to know this is what this podcast is about. I don't want anybody to think that my podcast is about recipes or raising horses when that is not what this podcast is about at all. But if I mention those things in my description, it would get analyzed that way. So you want to make sure that if you have a podcast about business or life coaching, then you want to use those words in your description. So the same with show notes. Show notes are kind of, I think a lot of people get confused on what show notes are. So show notes to me are the words that pop up whenever you click on a specific episode within a podcast. Those are the show notes that you upload to your hosting site. Again, going back to Buzzsprout, I upload the audio of a podcast to Buzzsprout. Then I upload the show notes. Those are the important things I want you to know if you're listening, somewhere on your phone or your tablet or whatever. Like, I want you to be able to read what the episode is about. But show notes to me also are individual posts on my website that I have optimized for SEO purposes. So this is kind of a gray area because not everyone has a website that has a podcast. And honestly, it's not a requirement. You do not have to have a website in order to have and run a successful podcast. However, if you want to take advantage of SEO and Google and being able to pop up in someone's news feed, let's say you're a business coach, life coach, then you want to utilize these free services of SEO by utilizing everything that you can on your website, optimizing everything.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
I hope that makes sense, but if you have any questions about any of this, just shoot me an email, hit me up on social media. I'd be happy to dive further into this with you. Like I said, we could be here forever talking about it because I just totally geek out on it. But there's nothing wrong with mentioning whatever you want to talk about on your podcast. Obviously, you can say whatever you want to say, but be very careful about the specific words that you use to put in your show notes and to put in your descriptions. You just want to make sure that you're getting the right keywords and phrases in there to describe your show. So, like I said earlier, like on the surface, it may not seem like that big of a deal, but over time and the more episodes that you start to put out, let's say this year you only had 20 episodes, but next year you're up to, or 2 years from now, you have 200 episodes mentioning the same theme, business, life coach, whatever you are, then hey, Google's going to pay attention to that. And by the way, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We are not in this for the quick turnaround, like, oh, I got 1 million downloads my first month of podcasting. That's not what I'm about. I am really about teaching you how to create a sustainable podcast for the long term. So I want you to have the best tools in your toolbox you can from day one. And I don't want you to have any regrets about wishing I wish I would have spent more time on keywords from the very beginning or phrases that were related to my topic, because been there, done that. It's one of my top regrets that I wish I would have understood a long time ago. But another reason why the descriptions and show notes play a big role right now is they're going to build that into marketing. So that kind of just slides right into our next step in how to market a podcast. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So don't slack off whenever it comes to creating like amazing descriptions for your show. If you do the work now and create awesome copy for your podcast, then you'll be able to use that amazing copywriting again in the future. Okay, so that was number 3. We talked about descriptions and show notes and keywords. Okay, so number 4, we're going to talk about your launch plan. And this is the part where all of your hard work really pays off. Because I personally have been a part of, I think, close to 10 book and product launches from organizations that are way, way bigger than mine. And I got to say, I've done a lot of learning. I feel like I've been like a fly on the wall, and I've just learned so much from other people and the things that they've done. And actually, I created a PDF just so you kind of understand some of my regrets. And it's called The 10 Things I Wish I'd Have Known Before I Launched My Podcast. And you can find it in my free resource library. It's at crystalprofit.com/tips and strategies. And again, I'll put that in the show notes so you'll know what that's all about. Because, oh my gosh, y'all, I only put 10 things I wish I would have known, but there's probably more. I probably could have come up with at least 30 things. Okay, but back to other organizations and all their launches. I've learned that the longer the time frame, the better. I've seen people create launch parties online and in-person, like coffee shop meetups or restaurant things, or even sell tickets to launch events. I've seen promo email sequences for courses. I've actually created these myself. And then people doing live videos and social media posts and YouTube videos and website pages and just so much more. Like really, when it comes to your launch plan, the possibilities of what you do are kind of endless. There's so many awesome things that you can do nowadays that I really encourage you to brainstorm when you're thinking like, man, what could I do that would really get people talking about my podcast? It would get them interested in the content, and it would make them want to binge listen to all the episodes that I have whenever my show goes live. And there's definitely not just one way to launch a podcast, but instead of going into detail about everything that we can do, I created a PDF guide for a basic podcast launch plan. So in it, you're going to find a lot of suggestions that you can use, a lot of the ones I just mentioned, but don't feel like you have to do everything that's on this list, okay? So I understand, like if you're a solopreneur and you don't have anyone else on your team, like you are the only person doing this, I totally get it. It's overwhelming to try to do all the things you really want to do. But I do suggest that you pick the things that you know will have the biggest impact on your show and your audience. So you can grab that at crystalprofit.com/launch. Again, that's the free guide to a basic podcast launch plan at crystalprofit.com/launch. And guys, that's it. We did it. We talked about everything that we got to do to launch a podcast. So the first thing we're going to do, the number 1, is you're going to announce your podcast launch date. Then number 2, you're going to set up your hosting site, which if you want to go with what I use, that is buzzsprout.com, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well. And then number 3 is you want to have awesome descriptions, show notes, and keywords. And really pay attention to these. And if you need, there are a ton of guides. If you're a Pinterest person, then go on Pinterest. That's actually where I started learning more about keywords. I have a board, and I'll link to it in the show notes, that is called The Secret to Keywords. And it helps me really understand like, hey, this is how you can use it in different ways. So I'll link to that in the show notes. Like I said, I want to go down this rabbit hole, but I feel like that is an episode, or that's like info for another episode. Okay. And then the fourth thing is your basic launch plan. So just keep in mind that the longer time you have to launch, the more likely that you're going to have a better launch. And I know that kind of stinks, right? Whenever you're really, really excited, because I'm stubborn this way. I did the same thing. I published a book a few years ago, and instead of creating a launch plan, I was just like, I'm done with it. It's edited. It has a cover. It's beautiful. It's going to go out into the world. And guess what? No one was excited to buy it. I had a few people that were like, oh, this is awesome. I'll go buy it. But other than that, nothing. And I'm part of, actually right now, as I'm recording this episode, I'm part of 2 different book launches. And y'all, they've done an amazing job. Like, I've gotten free PDF downloads, and I've gotten, videos, and I've gotten a private Facebook group access. And I actually got a copy of one of the books. It was like an advanced reader copy. And I'm like so excited. I'm like, ooh, I'm going to tell everybody about this because I'm excited. Like, so keep that in mind. Like, what would make your audience so excited to share the content that you have and your podcast, like just everything, like just have that question top of mind whenever you're creating your basic podcast launch plan. And I promise, like, you can make this thing so amazing, so amazing. I just know, like, there's like, the sky is the limit. You can do so well if you just have a plan in place. So again, go to crystalprofit.com/launch to download your basic podcast launch plan. But that's all I got for y'all today. So I hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions about launching. And I'm going to have to do an episode about keywords because that's kind of a big deal. And I really could just go down a rabbit hole, and I'm not going to. But if this is your first time tuning in, I'd love for you to subscribe to the show and hear the other fun things that we're going to be talking about in the few weeks, because I have some really exciting stuff coming that I'm so excited to talk about. But that does it for today's episode. So remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.